As we enter spring after a long, cold winter, we're left with the reality that ski and snowboarding season is quickly coming to an end. Of course, I didn't hit the slopes this year because I'm deathly afraid of smashing into a tree. But thankfully, extreme sports games like Amped and SSX have done an excellent job giving me the high-speed rush of racing down a mountain. But while those franchises may have had the stunts, good looks, and attitude, it was Snowboard Kids that had the zany cinemas. So turn back now if you don't want to know what happens next, because today we're going to spoil the stories and endings for both Snowboard Kids 1 and 2 on the Nintendo 64. This is Game Over, the early years. If you're not down with the Snowboard Kids, then it's probably worth mentioning that this series is a lot more like Mario Kart than SSX. In fact, there are huge stretches of this game where the kids aren't even boarding on snow. It's basically a kart racing game, complete with bombs and other items that you can throw at your opponents to screw them up and ensure that you're going to come in first. And that may be one of the reasons why this series has been all but forgotten in the last quarter century. Critics liked it back in the day, but there's no doubt that it was overshadowed by the glut of clones left in Mario Kart's wake. Now, like a lot of racing games, Snowboard Kids doesn't have much of a story. It stars a bunch of kids who go to the ski lodge and hit the slopes in the most violent yet cartoony way possible. Slash, Nancy, Jam, Linda, Tommy, and Shinobin race down the night highway, the grass valley, an amusement park, a village in the middle of the Cherry Blossom Festival, and even a stage made up entirely of quicksand. That's the same as snow, right? Despite not having much of a story, Snowboard Kids does have a cool ending that showcases each of the characters' personality. It's the one time that we actually get to know these kids, something that'll become a much bigger part of the sequel. With all the races conquered and the first place prize in our possession, I think it's time to roll the credits. This is what happens next. Only 1 year after introducing us to the Snowboard Kids, Atlus returned to the slopes with a somewhat anticipated sequel. For as much as I liked the first game, I've always felt like it was missing something. It needed more of a story, maybe even more conflict. Thankfully, Snowboard Kids 2 brings both of those things with the introduction of a demonic new character named Damien. He came to take over Snowtown. However, after Slash, Jam, Linda, and the rest of the Snowboard Kids embarrass him, he changes goals and decides to get his sweet, sweet revenge. This sets up a goofy story where he hatches a plot to get back at the kids. For example, he tries to ruin the snowboarding fun by weaponizing a crab at the beach. Of course, he's not the only one causing trouble, as we see the boys ruin Linda's birthday party by eating all the food. Over Wendy's house, the kids are shrunk down in order to snowboard indoors. Later, a UFO sends the kids into space. Also, there's a haunted house for some reason. Don't ask. We get one of these silly cinemas before all of the courses, which may not be much of a story, but at least it shows off the kids' personalities. That's definitely more than I can say about the first game. But let's go back to Damien for a moment, because I would argue that he actually has a real good reason to be upset. Sure, he was kind of a jerk before, but remember, this was the guy who had been completely shunned by the in-crowd. Also, he's been harboring a crush on Nancy, a girl who doesn't even know he exists. And that goes for the rest of the Snowboard Kids, who not only ignore him, but knock him around. The only time they actually listen to Damien is when he threatens to battle them. He brings out a giant robot to ensure his victory, which definitely sounds bad, I'll give you that. But remember that he's going after a group of kids that not only used a shrink gun on him, but also shot him into space. The Snowboard Kids end up winning a race against Damien, and this is what happens next. Now that Damien's evil plans have been thwarted, it's finally time for the kids to get back to just having fun in the snow. Here's an extra ending that's a lot more in line with the original game's conclusion, which once again goes a long way to show the character's personality without saying even a single word. Honestly, I think I prefer this upbeat cinema over the whole Damien subplot. I'll let you decide. Here you go. Now, in case you're wondering, there was a third game in the franchise that was released on the Nintendo DS back in 2006 called SBK Snowboard Kids. Yeah, I don't think it's too harsh to say that this is a Snowboard Kids game in name only. Instead of continuing the storyline, Atlus decided to dramatically change both the characters and the art style, creating a game that nobody liked. Worst of all, the endings are terrible. So yeah, there's no point in even going over it here. Instead of dwelling on the awful way the series ended, let's instead celebrate the two games that are still worth going back and playing today. Yes, they're Mario Kart clones. But you know what? They also bring something new and unique to both the racing and snowboarding genres. And even though they're incredibly simple, I really like how they handle the different endings. I love how the story isn't bogged down by a bunch of dialogue and that the developers were able to convey so much through simple expressions. In that sense, it reminds me a lot of the Looney Tunes cartoons, only instead of beautiful hand-drawn animation, we get lame blocky polygons. Now, almost a quarter century later, the Snowboard Kids would likely be in their 30s with jobs, mortgages, and probably children of their own. But look, I don't care if Slash is balding and Damien is fat, because I say that it's time to bring back these kids for another sequel. I mean, just as long as it has nothing to do with that awful Nintendo DS game. You really should just forget that that even happened. Hey, thanks for watching this week's episode of Game Over, the early years. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes almost every week. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite skiing or snowboarding game? Personally speaking, I'm real partial to SSX 3. I know a lot of people probably prefer SSX Tricky, but I love how much the third game advances the series and genre. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with a review of El Hijo, followed by Gangsta Paradise and more. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,